EF Core also lets you execute Raw SQL. It can be a full SQL expression, or you can execute stored procedures for querying or modifying the data in the database. We already have one stored procedure, so we'll be working with that. Before that, let's take a look at how this will work. First, there are methods that let you execute Raw SQL against your defined DB sets, like we have books, authors, publishers. If you are coming from an earlier version of EF Core, note that the method names have been changed. Before .NET Core 3, there was a single method called FromSQL and another method like ExecuteSQL method. But it turned out they had some issues, because of which the EF Core team decided to change that. Now for query purposes, we have the FromSQL Raw and FromSQL Interpolated. Both of these methods have their async versions as well. So before we dive deep, let's take a look at examples. We'll switch back to our project, and in here, let's first see Raw SQL example. We'll have variable book raw is equal to _db dot books. Here we want to use the FromSQL raw. Right here we will have to pass the SQL statement that we want to execute. I'm just going to say select star from dbo.books, and whatever returns will convert that to a list. One thing to notice here that you can use FromSQL raw on the entity, so we are using books here because we know we are returning all the books. That being said, what if you want to use parameters here? Like you can use where book_id is equal to, and then maybe you can append some parameter here, but you should never do that. Because if you do that, then you are exposing your query or your website to be prone to SQL injection attack. So if you have parameters, we will use the other method. So right here, let me do book temp 1, and let me add an integer id is equal to 1. Then right here, let me add a where condition, and we will be using string interpolation. So right here, we'll use the id variable, and if you want to use interpolation, you need the $sign. That being said, the method will be FromSQL Interpolated. So then it will append the ID or whatever parameter it is right here, and you are protected from SQL injection attack. So right here, we'll say SQL injection attack prone. So these are the two ways. Let's execute them and take a look at them. Let's run the project and go to our playground. We'll go to book and we'll click on playground. Let's hit F10. We'll execute this. Great, you can see all the 6 books have been retrieved, and we'll execute this one to retrieve 1 book, and we did not find that because I believe we do not have any book with ID 1. Let's just double check to be safe. And yes, we were correct. But if you had a book with ID 1, that would have worked. So here we saw both the FromSQL raw and FromSQL interpolated in action. That being said, you might have noticed that there are a few limitations here. One of the limitation is it must return the data for all of the columns in the books entity. So right here, if you just wanted ISBN and price, this will not work. It needs all of the entities inside the books to be populated. Only then you can use the FromSQL raw and FromSQL interpolated. Also, the column names that are returned must match what are all of the properties inside the mapped entity. And another drawback is that queries cannot contain related data. So even though there are few drawbacks, under some circumstances, this can come pretty handy. That being said, we also have our stored procedure to call. So let me call that right here. I'll call this books as proc and we'll execute it against the books, and that is because that stored procedures return the record based on the ID that we pass for the book. So right here on the books we will use from SQL interpolated, and we will call the stored procedure. So right here we have the $sign, we'll call execute DBO dot, we need the stored procedure name. So let me go back and I'll copy this, we'll paste it here, and we need to pass the parameter. So right here, let me pass the ID one more time, and that should do the trick. We'll convert that to a list. Once you have that, let me change the ID to 2 this time, and let's rerun the application. We will go to book, and we'll go to the playground, F10. We should receive 1 book, there we go. And we have the stored procedure that should also retrieve 1 book, and everything is working as expected. If you go to the output and if you examine the logs here, at the very end you will see the stored procedure gets executed. So you can see how we can use Raw SQL for execution of the queries, but there are limitations as we discussed.